My name is Tim Gatkachur. I'm the Director of Research at Western Economic Services. We're working on the state of Nebraska Consolidated Plan. We've got a little presentation to run through here. If you'd like a copy of that, email me after the presentation. I'll send it on to you. We're also recording this, so anything that you say, we'll transcribe it and put it in the back of the document, and then pull out any relevant policy recommendations that may come out of the meeting. If you do have any questions or comments, please just chime in or type them in. All the boxes also get downloaded to an Excel spreadsheet. So if you want to be on the record in that manner, please feel free to do that. The chat box also does kind of export as well. So if you want to be on the record, we will include all of the public input during this session. So that is great. And we'll kind of just dive right in. If this works. Okay, I just want to see audience view. Cool, there we go. Just making sure you can see what I can see. All right, so the question, why prepare a consolidated plan? Well, in exchange for federal funds from HUD, recipients must prepare 4 things. The first is a consolidated plan, and that kind of identifies the most pressing needs in a community, jurisdiction, state, whatever entitlement is receiving the funds. Number 2 is the annual action plan, and the annual action plan is kind of the actual projects that are allocated to address those funds identified in the consolidated plan. And those actually, that's kind of where you actually spend the money, and those are actual real projects. Number 3 is the CAPER. The CAPER is kind of the report card of the annual action plan, which is, again, based on the consolidated plan. So 1, 2, and 3 all kind of flow together, identified needs, how to address those needs, the actual money and projects to address those needs, and the CAPER is the evaluation to make sure you're meeting those goals. And then the 4th is the assessment of fair housing. It's a little bit outside of 1, 2, and 3, but it's still required for entitlement jurisdictions to file. We have a webinar later today at 2:30 Nebraska time for the analysis to impediments of fair housing choice. So if you'd like to come back, we'd love to have you. I just want to make sure. Yes, slides be available. Answer it. Yes, I will either make them available. Yes, the answer is the question was, will the slides and the PowerPoint be available afterwards? Yes. We'll either upload it here or just send me an email, and I'll send them to you ASAP right after this meeting. So cool. The question thing worked. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. The purpose of the consolidated plan, like I alluded to earlier, was to help identify housing and community needs, priorities, and strategies, and how to indicate how state and federal funds will be allocated over the 5-year period. Annual action plan sets the actions for year 1. So basically, you know, in exchange for receiving federal funds, they want to know how you're going to spend those funds to best address the needs in your state. How do we go about identifying the needs? Well, first we start with a massive quantitative and qualitative data poll, essentially. We pull a lot of data from the United States Census, 2010 and American Community Survey. We have Bureau of Labor Statistics data, Bureau of Economic Analysis data, US Census building permits data. So a wide variety of data sources that we pull in. That's only part of the story. You know, that's kind of the higher level view. You get a more detailed and granular view of what's actually going on in your community by, you know, reaching out to the public and actually hearing what people have to say. So this is a big and important part of this process is the public input. Sorry, just making sure everybody can talk if they need to. So I was in Nebraska last week. We had a consolidated planning public input meeting and analysis to impediments fair housing meeting in Lincoln, but it's a statewide AI and a statewide comp plan. So we were excited that we could do this webinar so folks that were not able to come to Lincoln were able to still provide input. Yes, and also the slides will be posted on the consolidated page website. Thanks, Rebecca. Cool. So they will certainly be available. And also we had discussed making this. We are recording this, so the actual recording of the presentation will also be made available in case you want to watch it later. Again, it's the world of streaming. So once you kind of get all the quantitative and data input and get all the public input through public input forums such as these, and also we have 2 surveys running. We have a consolidated plan survey and an analysis to impediments of fair housing survey. Please take them. I will say it over and over again. You'll get tired of it, so just do it, and then we'll be good. So we take the survey results, we take the public input, we take all the data that we find, and then we put it together and identify needs and strategies and response. Yes?
Excuse me, I might That's right, though. I can do it. I can do it. Yeah, come on. As long as you don't ask me anything real tough.
I was just gonna say, did you see the calendar in there? And I'm leaving at
Okay,
12:30 today for the doctor's appointment.
Okay, that's good. Oh, I don't know if you want to join us. So tomorrow we have our community engagement meeting, which is mainly about talking about tenants and what kind of housing we build. You can join us if you want, but
Okay. What time is that?
we try to avoid. It'll be at 11.
Great. Cool.
Let me make sure.
Is that the board meeting?
Yeah, like Julie Smith will be there. Dana Work.
So, okay. Okay, so content of the 5-year consolidated plan is a socioeconomic context. Like we look at demographic, economics, and housing trends. Housing market analysis, we evaluate a lot of what's going on in the housing market. We use a lot of the CHAS, Comprehensive Housing Affordability Strategy data set for that. That's an important data set, and that's where you kind of dial in on what your current housing need is in regards to affordable housing. Housing and homeless needs assessment, there's some point in time count data. We have a good slew of data there from the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, that we'll be using. And then the Housing and Community Development Strategic Plan, we put it all together and we have goals, objectives, and strategies for the plan. Okay, purpose of today's meeting is to advise you of some preliminary findings and offer opportunities to comment on what those directions, where those directions are pointing, and provide us with your opinions about the needs. Those are important, and if you have a solution to those needs and how to best address them, that would be great too. And then number 4, introduce the survey. So like I said, everything I say here and everything in the presentation will already be in the document. So it's really what you have to say and your input here that is the purpose of today's event. So if you have something to say, type it in the chat, type it in the questions. That all gets exported. I will address the questions, or just I think you can wave your hand and we will be able to like make sure you can talk and everything. Okay, sorry, I'm getting used to this the webinar thing. Okay, so for the area of analysis for the consolidated plan, we're focusing on the non-entitlement areas of the state. For the analysis of impediments of fair housing, we're actually focusing statewide. So we're preparing 2 reports in this project. One is the COM plan, which focuses on Nebraska, minus Bellevue, Grand Island, Lincoln, and Omaha. The AI will focus on the state as a whole. So here's the population growth for the state of Nebraska non-entitlement area. We see a pretty good linear growth from 2010 to 2018. You want to see population increasing, so that's a good sign. Population increases have their own kind of problems, but those are better problems to have than population decreases. Here's population by race and ethnicity. Let's just take a second to understand what's going on in this table. The 2010 census is a census versus the 2017 5-year American Community Survey, which is a survey. So that means that there are 2 separate methodologies, so you can't actually compare the raw numbers here. You can't compare the actual population data to the population data. Since the census is a count of everyone and a survey is a sampled methodology. So, but what you can do when you ever see these 2 tables, you can see the percentage of totals. You can compare those. So here we see the percentage of the white population in 2010 was 91.7, and that actually rose to 93.0% in the most recent 2017 5-year ACS. We see here that the other population fell from 3.3 to 1.5. And that's normally because in the 2010 census, whenever we see a big drop in other racial categories, it's because the 2010 census worded race and ethnicity kind of vaguely. In the census, you have both a race and an ethnicity. In the 2010 census, it was kind of it was worded awkwardly. So most people who identified as Hispanic or non-Hispanic identified as other. In the American Community Survey, that question was actually way more clear, as that you have both a race and an ethnicity. So most Hispanic persons who identify as Hispanic also now identify as white. So across the country, we see a decrease in the amount of other percent populations, falling from 3.3 to 1.5%. African American populations, 1.2, rising to 1.5%, and the Hispanic population rose from 7.4 to 8.7%. So once again, whenever you see these tables, the 2010 census and 2017 5-year ACS, You can really focus only on the percentage of totals if you want to compare the 2 years, percentage of total versus percentage of total. If you want to just get an actual count, you can see that there's 1 million people in Nebraska. So these numbers are valid, but you just can't compare them to the 2010 census. White population. So the census is tabulated by a block, which is a city block, which is pretty small. The next level that the census is tabulated at is a block group, which is still very small. And the next level up is a census tract. So this is a map of census tract level data. The idea of a census tract is the population is generally all generally all the same size. That's why you see in kind of these more rural areas, we see very large census tracts, almost half the size of a county. And then when you kind of zoom in, you can't see here because we have the non-entitled or the other entitlement jurisdictions whited out. But if you get into Omaha and Lincoln, you see very small census tracts because there's just a higher density of population. We see here, a couple areas of non-white population pops out right up here, and then over here in the western portion of the state. But majority, 93.3 to 100% white households across the state. American Indian households, kind of the converse of the white households up here by Sioux City. You see right there, census tract jurisdictions, 13.2 to 70.3% as well right there. So also some reservations in there. So we do see some concentrations of American Indian households throughout the state. Hispanic households, we do see some scattered patches of Hispanic households. Here kind of on the up there, here, and down here. Some census tract levels rising from 40.2 to 80.2% of the population in those census tracts are Hispanic households. Excuse me. Okay, so that's kind of like the fast demographic trends. There's a lot more tables. Trust me, the document will be very, very, very big. I just try to keep the presentation to an hour or so. So if you do have any questions about demographics, type them in, and I'll be happy to answer them, and we'll just kind of keep it on. I just want to make sure again that everyone is okay to talk if they want to. Yes, okay. Okay, sorry. Yeah, this thing is a little chunky. Okay. Persons with disabilities. This is disability by age. We see the disability rate in the non-entitlement areas of Nebraska, the most recent in the 2017 five-year ACS data is 11.8%. The male disability rate is slightly higher at 12.4 compared to 11.1% female disability. The thing to take away here is that as you age, the amount of the disability rate increases rather dramatically. So 75 or older, we get up to 46.9% of all persons that are 75 or older have a disability. And so you're in this table if you have one of these disability types. Now you can have multiple disability types. That's why we can't have a total down here. And this is the percent of total population with a disability. So we see here the highest is ambulatory disability. 6.6% of all persons in the non-entitlement areas of the state of Nebraska have an ambulatory disability. And the second two are tied for hearing disability and independent living disability. So we can kind of see as you age, back in this chart, it gets harder to get around, or self-care or independent living. So you kind of see that's why you have an increase in disability rate as you age, because you kind of fall into these categories. Person with disabilities scattered. There's one area right here. I'm going to dig into that and figure out what's going on. There's probably a senior living center that got built there at 22.7 to 29.1% of the population has a disability. But otherwise, it's pretty smooth across the state. Okay, so labor force statistics. This is the Bureau of Labor Force Statistics annual unemployment rate. This is the state of the non-entitlement area of Nebraska. So we selected out the entitlement cities, and we see here trends pretty similar to the statewide rate as a whole, slightly less than the most recent numbers. Now this chart looks good. I mean, we had a bump here in the early 2000s and a big bump. Well, actually, it looks big here. If you look at the y-axis, we're only peaking at about like 4.6%. US was well over 10. I've seen jurisdictions at 16%. So, the chart looks like it took a big hike, and it did, but, comparatively to the rest of the country, the state of Nebraska really weathered the Great Recession extremely well, peaking at, a relatively modest 4.7% unemployment rate. But then we see, a continual decrease in the unemployment rate after the Great Recession and the post-recession recovery. Now, anytime you see this chart, you always want to ask, well, what does the actual labor force and unemployment look like? Because you can have a decreasing unemployment rate with decreasing labor force and employment. So this is the chart. Here we have employment is the yellow line. Blue is the labor force. So we do see here that, during the Great Recession, we see a dip both in employment and labor force. Employment fell faster than labor force right here. The difference, the area between the two lines is the actual number of unemployed persons. So we see here the unemployment rate took a larger dip than the labor force, which is why we see a spike in the unemployment rate. But then, we do see an increase in the employment and labor force during the post-recession recovery that we see here, and that's kind of driving this unemployment rate down. But then we do see some stagnation and slight decrease in the employment and labor force in the non-entitlement areas of the state. So although the unemployment rate is decreasing, we do see also decrease in the labor force and employment. So something to keep an eye on. It's not like a massive decrease. It's just kind of stagnating and trending downward. So it's not necessarily something to be extremely worried about. It's just something to track. It's still much higher than, the 2000 levels. So in post-recession. So if you look, it's over there. So just something to keep an eye on. Here we go, and this is the actual chart that we saw. Unemployment rate spiked at 4.7 and 2.9, and then down to 2.7%. Classical economic theory says 4% unemployment rate is full employment. That's what they teach in textbooks back in college. I'm not sure if that's necessarily true anymore because the economy is so different now. But we see Nebraska is well below that 4% rate, and even during the Great Recession was just slightly higher than that. So the labor, despite the stagnation and maybe some jitters in the labor force and employment growth, we do see a solid economic outlook in Nebraska. Or, generally. Real average earnings per job is from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. The Bureau of Economic Analysis is only available at the county level, so we were unable to subtract out the entitlement jurisdictions, and this is the statewide stuff, so we always swap that. But we do see here, a pretty down, and so this is real average earnings per job. Anytime that you work a job and you earn money, the Bureau of Economic Analysis tabulates that, and they sum up all of the earnings across the entire state and divide it by the number of jobs, so we get average earnings per job. If you work 2 jobs, if you have 2 part-time jobs, those jobs are divided by, those are added twice, so you can actually be in this twice, divided twice. So we do see a good increase, and actually, during the 2009, if you think during the post-recession recovery, we see a pretty sizable increase in the average earnings per job. But then again, we see a kind of stagnation and decrease, and that kind of mirrors what we're seeing here up in this kind of decrease employment and labor force. So it's kind of again stagnating and maybe dropping off slightly. Not dramatically, but something to just keep an eye on. Households by income. So we also see this the 2010 5-year ACS and 2017 5-year ACS. We see here the main takeaway of this slide is increases in $100,000 or more, percent of total rising from 16.1 to 23.5%. These are undeflated dollars, so we do see the dollars on this side. The 2017 dollars are worth less than the 2010 dollars just because of inflation and the lack of deflating these values. So that does account for some increase in the household, on the higher end of the spectrum, but not that much. So like the cost of living increases aren't that much. But then we also do see decreases in less than 15,000 households, falling from 11.4 to 9.1%. And kind of the middle of the spectrum as well, 25 to 35, 11.4 to 9.8. So we do see some increasing in household by income. Kind of on that next topic, poverty by age for the non-entitlement area. The 2010 census, like I said, does not ask about income. And then they changed the poverty questions in the American Community Survey, like midway through, so you couldn't actually get a 2010 poverty estimate. So the best we can do for a temporal comparison between these two for the non-entitlement area is 2000 census and the 2017 5-year ACS. And we see here that there was a very small increase in the poverty rate, 9% to 9.7%. I've seen much worse throughout my travels, so that's actually a pretty good, pretty good number. Poverty rate by census tract statewide, we do see some concentrations of poverty here. If you remember back to the demographic slides, those are the census tracts where we saw higher concentrations of American Indian households. And then everything else is pretty much smooth across the state. Some other ones here, kind of in the zoom. If you zoom into these jurisdictions, you can kind of see there as well some higher concentrations of poverty, but nothing over really, the jurisdiction average was 9.7%, so nothing super outrageous, up to 24.8 to 32.7% in these upper census tracts. Sorry, it's still early here, so I'm drinking coffee. Economics, poverty rates. This is the small area income poverty estimates. This is another way of measuring poverty, also put up by the census. It's available statewide and county level, so we're unable to subtract out the entitlement jurisdictions. That's why I stayed in Nebraska. But we do see here poverty rates increasing during the Great Recession. That makes sense. We saw a spike in the unemployment rate. People were losing their jobs. Poverty rate increased. And then, kind of mirroring the recovery, we see a decrease in the poverty rate. So we see a decrease, also a decrease in the decrease in the unemployment rate. So decrease. So
zero.
So we see, so we see some decrease in the poverty rates. Homelessness, balance of time, point in time counts, continuum of care. When I was out there last week, I was told that this chart, the 2012 stuff, was invalid, so that will go away, and I'll probably get that out of here for next Thursday's presentation. And then we see, so just kind of ignore the 2012 stuff. It had different methodology. Quick note on this methodology, this is a point in time count. So it happens early January, once a year. You go out and count all the persons that are experiencing homelessness. That's a difficult project because they're, those folks are often moving, and it's hard to keep track, and want to double count, and it's hard to find them sometimes. So the HUD's idea of doing it in January, it's cold, it's very cold. So their idea was that you could go to a shelter if you were experiencing homelessness and it was cold, you would go to a shelter. Otherwise, you might be more transient in nature, and then you would get a more accurate count. I don't know if that actually works in practice because when it's super cold, you might just go. You try anything you can to get off the street. So I believe these numbers are actually underrepresented of what's happening. Again, please disregard the 2012. It's a different methodology, but we do see here. Decreasing the persons experiencing homelessness are kind of decreasing and trending downward. 2018 was a little higher, 2019 is a little less. So those are kind of moving in the right direction. Emergency shelters kind of also, so the black bar is emergency, transitional is gray, and unsheltered is the blue. So we do see a kind of an increase in 2016, 17, 18, and then falling a bit in 2019. This is households. So this is persons, and then this is households. They mirror each other pretty well. But again, ignore 2012. We're taking that out as per our suggestion last year, or last session. Okay, so housing units by tenure. The way you read this table, again, it's kind of a nested table here. So total housing units is just like a unit to live in. It's a house, it's a apartment unit, a duplex, triplex, boat, RV, they count those. And then, so those are just physical structures where people can live. Once that is occupied, once someone moves in, it becomes an occupied housing unit or a household, same thing. And then you are either renting it or owning it. So it's an owner or renter. So the way you read this is total occupied plus vacant equals total housing units, and owner plus renter equals occupied housing units. So we do see here a slight decrease in the percentage share of owner-occupied households, falling from 73.1 to 72.4, and then conversely, a slight increase in the renter-occupied share, rising from 26.9 to 27.6%. Those aren't big increases, and owner-occupied share at 72.4% is pretty high compared to the national average, so that's pretty good. We do see a slight increase in the vacant housing units, rising from 10.9 to 11.3%. Now, when we dial in, now we can like kind of zoom in on just the vacant households. These are households with with nobody living in them. The disposition of vacant households, we see the majority are for seasonal recreation, not the majority, 28% of them are for seasonal recreational occupational use. For rent, for sale, rented, sold, not occupied, don't really need to worry about them. They're still in the market. They're just taking a little bit of time to be absorbed back into the market. For seasonal recreational occasional use, don't need to worry about those either because they have a purpose. They were just vacant at the time that someone received the survey. What you do need to kind of worry about or zoom in on is this other vacant household. And that's just by little definition, the census definition is none of the above. So it's kind of like choose your own adventure, but what falls in there are foreclosed households, dilapidated households that the owners just kind of are just letting sit there, kind of ready to fall apart, but they don't have the resources or immediate desire to take those houses down. So that's kind of basically anything not in the above. Unfortunately, there's not a better definition of that. And so here's the other vacant households just for of all vacant households. This is not of all households. This is just zooming in on vacant households. What does that look like? And we do see some pockets of like high, other vacant households scattered throughout the state. Some jurisdictions like to look at this data and see if they can somehow bring those units back into the marketplace. You kind of really have to kind of dig into what's going on there, but this is kind of just a high-level overview about where those are issued across the state. Yeah, so okay, so continuing into the housing market, we see households by year built. The majority of the housing stock in Nebraska's non-entitlement areas in Nebraska was built in 1939 or earlier, 23.3%. And then we see another kind of building boom in the 70s, 16%. And then we see another kind of more recent one in the 1990s and 2009, 10.5 and 14.6%. So we do see kind of a stratification of just housing stock, 1939, the 70s, and then kind of the 90s and more recent stuff. So those are kind of the peaks, if you will. Anytime that you want to build a new house, you file a permit with the local jurisdiction that where you're building it, and the census data collects that. The census collects that data and makes it available for analysis. These are single-family building permits from the United States Census. The blue line, or the blue bars, are the permits. The yellow line is the actual value that you write down on the permit. Now, that value does not include cost of land. That's just cost of labor, materials, building it, those kind of things. So this number over here is does not include cost of land. But what we do see here, we see a kind of a big big buildup like we saw in the previous slide. Here we see in the 90s and the 2000s, we see some bigger share of housing stock, and we see that here. We see 1990 some good building, and then we see in the early 2000s, this is indicative of the housing bubble. We see a big increase in number of number of units built, and then after the housing market burst, we see a decrease in the number. So falling down all the way to 2011 was kind of the minimum, and then we see an increase in kind of this new structural normal rate here. Kind of around 2,500 units. We see the building permits fluctuating above 2,500, and this looks like to be, at least in the most, for the remainder of this data set, kind of like the new structural normal. And if you trace it back, it's below the 1990s, but above the 1980s. But the 2000s was a very weird year for housing, obviously, because it was like hopefully a once in a lifetime or once in a country time event. Let's hope. But during the collapse of the actual number of units built, we still see an increase in the value of those units being built. And this is kind of where you start seeing the beginning of the affordability housing issues, because you see a decrease in supply, but the value is still going up. So, in a market, supply and demand, economics 101, if you decrease supply, as a result, price will increase. And then you're also increasing the value. So it's kind of like a double whammy. And that's why you've been seeing some housing affordability issues throughout throughout the state and the country. You know, and then it just hasn't been catching up there. The building permits also evaluate not only single family units, what we just saw, but all, you know, unit types, duplex, triplex, apartment units. So we see here the gray is a single family, the black is apartment units, kind of yellow is duplex, and blue is the triplex. So we do see here that we have some decent multifamily units being built. And again, this is for the non-entitlement areas of the state in the 90s, and then kind of falling off in the early 2000s. During the actual, you know, crash, when the bubble was bursting, not a lot of multifamily units, but then we see a couple in 2010 and 2013 standout years, big units. These are units, so if you have one apartment complex with like, you know, 100 units, this is the unit count, not just the complex count. And then we kind of see here a mix there. So that's what we see. That's total permits by unit type for the non-entitlement areas of Nebraska. This is median contract rent from the 2017 5-year ACS. We see higher rents around more urban areas. That's to be expected. We blocked out, like I said, the entitlement areas, but we do see surrounding Omaha and Lincoln higher levels of rent, and also in the I-80 corridor a little bit, and some pockets throughout the state. Median home value also kind of follows the same trend, but the expansion is a little bit bigger around the urban areas. We see here urban areas of the state, higher median values, again around the I-80, high values here, and again, so the western part of the state. So those are median home values and median contract rent from the 2017 5-year American Community Survey. Okay, now we're getting into housing problems. This data set up here is the CHAS data set, Comprehensive Housing Affordability Strategy data set. This is created by HUD specifically for the consolidated planning process. So they really want to see these tables. And C is for comprehensive. There's a lot of tables. We include a lot in the actual document. We only included some here in the presentation, so because you don't want to hear me talk all day. But first things first, the definition of a housing problem is something defined by HUD. You have a housing problem if you are suffering from one of 4 conditions. The first being you're living in a housing unit with lacking complete kitchen facilities, like you don't have a refrigerator, you have a housing problem. The second is lacking complete plumbing facilities, like you don't have a sink in your bathroom or haven't been a toilet in your bathroom. You have a housing problem. I guess you use a bucket. I don't know. The third is overcrowding. If you have more than 1 person per room in your dwelling unit, you're overcrowded. If you have more than 1.5 persons per room, you're severely overcrowded. So overcrowding and severely overcrowding come together. If you're overcrowded, you have a housing problem. The fourth most common and unfortunately the most serious is cost burden. If you spend above 30% of your income on housing costs, you're cost burdened. If you spend above 50% of your income on housing costs, you're severely cost burdened. And when you're up above that 50%, you may be a couple paychecks away from being in a very tricky situation where you may be experiencing homelessness in the future or near future. So we dial in on the severe cost burden because that's a very great need, and then cost burden. But if you have a cost burden above 30 to 50 is cost burden, 50 and above is severe cost burden. So anywhere in that range above 30, you have a housing problem, and that accounts for around 75% of all housing problems. Lacking complete kitchen or plumbing facilities around 2 or 3%, and overcrowding is in the middle or the remainder. This data set, tabulates not only by housing problems, but by income levels and also by a variety of, household characteristics. In this case, this is table 1. This is non-Hispanic by race by housing problems. So we're able to see here throughout the non-entitlement areas of the state of Nebraska, 21.9% of households are experiencing a housing problem. That's actually pretty low compared to the nation and other areas that I've seen. But when you break it down by race, we do see that the American Indian households, 40.5% of American Indian households are experiencing a housing problem. So that's almost double jurisdiction average. So we would say that that the American Indian population is experiencing disproportionate housing problems. African American households also at 37.3%, higher than the jurisdiction average, and then Hispanic of any race is 32.9%. So we do see some kind of peaks among racial breakdowns. So that is the percentage of total, these are the percents, and these are the actual just numbers, so you can actually see. So we do see, although you know, about a fifth of white households are experiencing housing problems, the majority of those households in the non-entitlement area of the state are facing a housing problem are white households, with 79,000 white households facing a housing problem. African American 1,600, American Indian 1,186, and then Hispanic 7,650, for a total of about 91,491 households, or like I said, 21.9% of all households in the state are experiencing a housing problem. So this is kind of where you start with, you know, when you're looking at affordability. No cost burden, severe cost burden, not computed is if you don't have any income, so you can't multiply, you know, 0.3 by 0. Math doesn't like that. Well, it gives you 0, so, you know, it's not computed. But we see here that, and then this is broken down by owner tenure share, so owner, renter by race. Severe cost burden, we'll just kind of look at this. Owner occupied, 17,000 owner occupied households throughout the non-entitlement area of the state are experiencing a severe cost burden. That's spending above 50% of their income on housing costs. Renter occupied households are 16,133, for a total of 33,206 households are experiencing a severe cost burden throughout the state. And then you kind of, so that's above 50%. And the cost burden is 30 to 50, so that's still considered a, you know, a housing problem. And we see an additional 31,000 owner occupied and 19,000 renter occupied. So the total you need is something around, you know, 83,000 units are experiencing a housing problem, cost burden, or severe cost burden. So these are, you know, good numbers to start with. This is just if you are experiencing a housing problem, one of those four, where do you know, are there any concentrated areas? We don't necessarily see any throughout the, that's not true. There's kind of one or two areas down here. Sometimes, you know, on a statewide map, it's kind of hard to see the more urban census tract areas. So there are some areas, some concentrated areas of census tract. But then we can break it down by you know, racial characteristics. Here's Hispanic households by housing problems, and we see here that if you are a Hispanic household in some of these areas, there are, you know, you are more, you know, 75.9% to 100% of Hispanic households in these areas are experiencing a housing problem, according to HUD. And then we also see American Indian households, kind of again scattered. Gray is data does not exist. Something, you know, over here where we saw a larger concentration of American Indian households, we don't necessarily see a large concentration of housing problems, but then kind of scattered throughout the state. Could also be small sample size, but this is what the data is showing us. Okay, cool. So what are we doing? We're just going to show you, to talk about some brief program descriptions. I'm going to show you some preliminary survey results. And you know, hopefully we'll get some public input either on the chat box or the talking or the questions, whatever. It's the future, so we can do it all. And then we'll have another public review meeting here in, I believe, in March. I just booked my trip, so I hope we're on for that. Okay. So there's a couple programs that you know are using this data to get, you know, using this data for the consolidated plan. First one is Community Development Block Grant. So this program focuses on activities involving rehabilitation of residential, non-residential structures, infrastructure improvements, public service, such as job and economic development, assistance providing through local governments for public, private, for-profit, nonprofit organizations. This one is kind of the broadest, you know, has the least restrictions. You can do more of it than the other ones. Families benefiting from the program must have incomes of no more than 80% of adjusted median family income for the area. So that's why it's important to have these tables, because you can see the income is breakdown. This is actually 0 to 30, 30 to 50, 50 to 8, yeah, 0 to 30, 30 to 50, 50 to 80. So, you know, it's focusing on households with under $62,000. So, and the objectives, the national objectives for the CDBG funds are benefit low and moderate income persons, prevention of elimination of slums or blight, and addressing the most urgent needs identified in the Consolidated Plan. Home investment partnerships. This program can fund a wide range of activities, including building, buying, and or rehabilitating affordable housing for rent or home ownership, providing direct rental assistance to low-income people. Families benefiting from this program must have incomes of no more than 80% of HUD-adjusted median family income, lower income targeting for specific activities, and home-funded housing units must remain affordable in the long term, and that's 20 years for new construction of rental housing, or 5 to 15 years for construction of home ownership housing and housing rehabilitation. National Housing Trust Fund is an affordable housing production program that complements existing federal, state, and local efforts to increase and preserve the supply of decent affordable housing. Families benefiting from this program must have incomes of no more than 30% of HUD-adjusted median family income. So, and then FTP-funded houses must remain affordable for 30 years. So if you go back to the CHAZ data set, we're looking at households with less than around $23,000 per year. ESG funds, emergency solution grants. This program provides funding for the street outreach, emergency shelters, homelessness prevention, and rapid rehousing assistance. This funding is paired with state funding from the Nebraska Homeless Association Trust Fund to create the Nebraska Homeless Assistant Program. And HOPWA, Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS. This program is dedicated to housing needs of people living with HIV/AIDS, and funds can be used towards housing, new construction, rehabilitation, rental assistance, short-term payments to prevent homelessness. Low-income persons at or below 80% of area median family income that are medically diagnosed with HIV/AIDS and their families are eligible to participate in this program. Okay, so as of 1/29/2020, there were 444 online responses to the State of Nebraska Housing Community Development Survey. If you haven't taken it, please do. If you have, thank you. Pass it on to your friends, your families, your enemies, your professional network, anyone. The more responses that we have, the better. This is kind of how we identify, perceived need. We can quantify this, then, we can show it to HUD, be like, this is what the community responded to. So please take the survey. If you have, again, thank you. If you haven't, come on, let's do it. So we sorted this. And also the survey was designed, with the Consolidated Plan funding requirements and funding, feasibility in mind. So we asked, questions that, could be addressed by those programs that we just talked about. Here, this is sorted by no, low, medium, and high need. Construction of new affordable single-family homes for sale, construction of new affordable single-family homes for rent, and construction of new affordable multifamily homes for rent. So we see construction of new affordable units are the highest perceived needs as of the most recent survey run. We see 222, 217, and 99. So, and then kind of slightly under that are homeowner housing rehabilitation and first-time home buyer assistance. A lot of the time, sometimes, not all the times, it's actually cheaper or costs relatively the same amount of money to actually own your house instead of rent. Owning your house has a lot of other long-term benefits, and but a lot of people just don't know how to transition from a renter or into a homeowner, especially if they don't have kind of that knowledge built into their long-term, if they don't know. So it's good to have a homeowner first-time home buyer assistance and rental housing for very low-income households following a 182. Do any of the following act as barriers to the development or the preservation of affordable housing in community? So the first slide clearly shows that there is a perceived need for affordable single-family and multifamily homes for rent and sale. Well, what are the barriers to bringing those to the market? And cost of land, cost of labor, and cost of materials. The cost is the highest barrier, which, building affordable housing, you want to make it affordable. However, bringing that to the market is difficult based on the cost factors. Fourth, kind of low, is the not in my backyard mentality, NIMBYism. When people hear affordable housing, we do sometimes have a stigma attached to that word, which is unfortunate. Doesn't necessarily mean what you think it means. It couldn't mean housing for teachers. It could mean housing for police officers, firefighters, someone just living in your community that doesn't want to commute so far away. So just combating the NIMBYism aspect is a barrier. And I do see a question here about being able to send me a link to the survey. The survey, oh yes, I have a link to the survey here, and I will find it. There will be a link to the survey. hopefully it should be here. So yes, I will make that link available. And I believe it's also on the consolidated planning page as well. Retention of existing businesses, so business and economic development activities in Nebraska. Retention of existing businesses, so if you have businesses, keep them. That's a big one. We did see in that economic slide, both labor force and employment stagnating and kind of falling off a little bit. So we want to stop that and turn that around. Attraction of new businesses, so keep the ones you have, bring in some more, and labor availability. Keep your labor, human capital in the state. And kind of increase that human capital. Oh wait, went backwards. There we go. So this is the infrastructure activities. Street and road improvements were diagnosed with the highest need, 171. Broadband and internet services, 155. Getting high-speed internet is kind of a gateway to the new economy. Sidewalk improvements, 124%. We do see some flood drainage improvements. The fourth one at 122, followed by biking and walking paths at 114. Community and public facilities in Nebraska, child care facilities, 177, and demolition of dilapidated structures, second highest at 153. And I'm wondering if that kind of correlates to that high other housing vacant unit that we saw in that first slide. But there's clearly a perceived need for demolition of dilapidated structures that are no longer on the market or able for rehabilitation. And third is youth centers, and then the one kind of same one who was tied at 120, 112 community centers. Human and public services in Nebraska. Mental health care services were 198, child care services at 179, and chemical dependency services at 161. So we do see some needs for human and public services in Nebraska. Mental health and chemical dependency, not necessarily correlated, but there is certainly some feedback between the two, and child care services. Please rate the need for housing types, the special needs population in the state. Senior housing, such as assisted living facilities, the baby boomer generation is aging. Rapid rehab housing for rental assistance for homeless households, and transitional housing. So we do see some needs for seniors and those experiencing homelessness or about to experiencing homelessness. Please rate the need for services and facilities for the special needs groups in Nebraska. At-risk youth, aging out of the foster system, the highest perceived need, persons with severe mental illness, and the elderly. So again, they're the age 85 plus. So we do kind of see that kind of correspond with this housing slide there. So this question is, if you were in charge of distribution of funds in the state, so let's say I gave you $100, how would you spend that $100 on this on these categories? The highest one, 21% or $21, were spent on housing development, followed by economic development and human and public services at 15%. And we do kind of see here water, infrastructure, public facilities, and planning kind of down the line. Okay, I need to find that survey link for you. So what are the needs of the community? What challenges are the households facing, and what can the community do to address these challenges? So you can either ask me a question here on the questions tab, or you can talk. I'm going to just make sure everyone is unmuted. If you guys want to, if anyone wants to wave their hand, maybe I can unmute you or something. Or you can chat in the chat box. If you want to make any comments, it's fine. Let me get the survey result or survey here, and then we can, or you can also just take the survey. We have a lot of survey text boxes, so you can add in all the surveys that you want. Oh boy, we're gonna just do that. Okay. So yeah, does anyone want? Do I have the survey? No, I don't. I'm gonna get that survey. Yeah, does anyone have any public input they'd like to say here? Or like I said, this slide and presentations will be available on the web page, and I'll find that survey link here somehow. Yeah, there we go. Let me find the survey link for you guys. So fun. Okay. Okay, surveys are on the web page. Thank you so much, Rebecca. I wish I could. Oh wait, there we go. I just want to put that there. Thank you. I was just about to dial that in. Come on. Technology is great until it doesn't work. Okay. Send to all. There's the survey link on your little chat thing. You can. I'll also put it in the bar here. Just go. Aha. Bring that over there. Okay, so if you go to this, we see here surveys, both the Housing Community Development Survey and Fair Housing Survey, right there. So up here, opportunitynebraska.gov, grow your community, 2020 to 2024 Consolidated Plan. Please take the survey. We'd love that. Like I said, if you'd like an email, this is my email. You can check the question box. Please just send me an email and I'll send you a survey. And I believe the presentation will be going to this website as well or somewhere nearby. But if you can't wait and you want the survey, just send me an email now. I'll get it to you. But yes, the presentation will be on this as well. Send to all. So yes, yeah, great. So we're excited. Later today, we'll be doing another fair housing survey or a fair housing forum. And then next week, if you want to redo this one, we'll be doing it again next Thursday as well. So thank you so much for your help. Please take the survey. Yeah, if there's no other questions, I hope everyone has a most wonderful Thursday. I'll just keep the question page open just in case anyone has one or two questions or a chat. So, okay, cool. All right. Well, cool. I thank you so much for digitally joining me, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you at the 2:30 Fair Housing Forum, or maybe even next Thursday. So, yeah, we're doing the Fair Housing Forum next Thursday as well. So if you can't, if you don't want to do two in one day, come back next week. Okay, great. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I look forward to hopefully seeing you at the housing conference in March.